Eat shit, Homelander. This is what gods are made of. Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and next time on Death Battle, we have Bob versus Clark. That's it. That's it, just two normal guys. Just two very, very, very normal, well-adjusted members of society. I fully expected Marvel vs. DC to make some kind of return on Death Battle this year, but I did not think this was the way they were going to do it. If anything, I was thinking some kind of Fantastic Four related matchup, since it would fall in between First Steps and Avengers Doomsday. But this still serves to be a decent commemoration for some of the stuff that has come out and is kind of coming out. And also, I am getting more and more excited for this matchup the more I think about it. I am surprisingly hyped for it. Not just in the sense of how ridiculously powerful these characters are, but also the craziness of their personalities and the story arcs that they're involved in. It is one of the more unique cape shit matchups that I think we could see on this series, and as someone who's more than a little invested in Marvel and DC and comics in general, I am really interested to see how they handle all of this. So yeah, I'm pretty damn excited. So of course, with both of these guys being broken beyond belief, we have to ask, is there any major difference when comparing their stats? And assuming that Death Battle is going to look at Marvel and DC's cosmologies roughly the same way, which I assume they still will, although I guess that's not a guarantee given how they've looked at some previous episodes, then no, I don't anticipate any massive advantages in those fields. Both of them have matched and in many cases exceeded ridiculously powerful heroes like Thor, Hulk, Silver Surfer, and Flash, Green Lantern, and Superman respectively. Add on other characters they can compare to like Galactus and Anti-Monitor, and this is more than enough to get them to a measurable speed or higher and beyond multiversal in power. However, if one of them is going to be seen as a little stronger and tougher, I think that's going to be Superboy-Prime. Not only does he have a lot more experience getting dogpiled by many of the heavy hitters at once and still proving to be a challenge, his absolute highest scaling, which includes fighting the Darkest Night, and thus scaling decently to characters like Perpetua and Dr. Manhattan, looks to be a little more definitive than Sentry's highest. Sentry is absolutely a celestial killer, as are Galactus and Null. But he was also ripped apart by Null, which I know a lot of readers had issues with, partially due to Sentry not still being in his merged state randomly, which is when he combines with the Void. Don't worry, we'll get to that thing. I honestly think using merged Sentry for this is a bit up in the air though, because it was very briefly a thing and now it's not. Sentry and the Void are vastly more often at odds with each other than trying to achieve a common goal, including currently in the comics, and we've seen many times that a serious battle, like this one against Prime, isn't enough to manifest the form, because it's only happened once. And while people didn't like that he got effortlessly overpowered by Null, it is still something that happened, and based on what we've seen in previous death battles, it could be used to determine a rough cap on Sentry's power that I personally think might fall a bit below Prime's highest stuff. Additionally, while I don't want to put too much of an emphasis on this, Sentry's troubling mental state has sometimes affected his effectiveness as a fighter. I particularly think back to some of the reasoning from Scarlet Witch versus Zatanna with this. He's a heck of a lot smarter than Prime, and Prime has suffered from some pretty severe obsession, but his rage just tends to add to how dangerous he is, if anything, and he's gotten more level-headed recently. But of course, Sentry's issues wouldn't really be a factor by the end if merged Sentry does come into play, and with that and or certain scaling chains you can employ, Death Battle could likely make Sentry and Prime more or less the same. That's just my extra 2 cents. And surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, even if there's a huge gap, the answer to this debate does not fully lie in how conventionally strong these guys are because of their bullshit abilities. And from a zoomed out perspective, Sentry definitely has a larger amount of them that could be very problematic. He can teleport, turn invisible, read people's minds, manipulate, project, and absorb all kinds of energies, and arguably most importantly, he can manipulate damn near all matter down to the molecular level however he wants and regenerate from such attacks, giving him a crazy healing factor that can bring him back to life even if his entire physical body is annihilated, each and every molecule. He doesn't even know how to kill himself. We know this because he's tried. And as alluded to earlier, Sentry's actually really intelligent and created an AI alongside Mr. Fantastic called Clock that can analyze people's abilities. But of course, all of this is before getting into the unique powers of the Void, a cosmic entity that's bound to Sentry and can emerge taking control of his body. It's most well known for using its tendrils to induce immense psychological trauma onto its victims, as well as possession, shape-shifting, phasing, biological, and technological manipulation, and it can even create armies out of darkness and remove souls. It's only specifically weak to spiritual life energy and certain kinds of magic, and its essence is intrinsically tied to Sentry, so for the most part, as long as one of them exists, both will exist. Superboy-Prime's abilities overlap with normal Kryptonians a lot, and I probably don't need to go over that stuff too deeply. As far as the less obvious stuff, he can absorb solar energy much faster than normal Kryptonians and absorb most other types of energy, travel between dimensions and through time, and he's got a lot of extra types of visions like electromagnetic, microscopic, infrared, and more. He also doesn't have any of the normal Superman weaknesses except for red sun radiation, although you would still need tons of that to actually depower him, and he's got the inherent Kryptonian super thinking, but isn't usually a strategist. But now we have to talk about the most meta thing here, known at least colloquially as the retcon punch. Superboy-Prime can punch so fucking hard that reality and history themselves literally get retconned, changing continuity as effectively as comic book writers often like to do. At first, he was only shown doing this in a very specific dimension, and its effects were random. But nowadays, he can do it essentially wherever he wants on a similar, if not even greater scope, and control exactly what kind of retcon it brings about. He doesn't even need to directly hit you in order for it to affect you, considering he once broke through the Phantom Zone and retconned Beast Boy's story as a side effect. He did sacrifice himself after a huge reality-shattering punch, but all that did was send him back to Earth Prime. Still with his powers. Presumably still including his dimensional travel, so overexertion be damned, I guess. So obviously things have gotten ludicrous, and both of these characters have at least one trait that sounds like it could win the fight immediately on paper. So really, I think the answer to who wins this lies in their resistances, and then after considering those, who's more likely to kill the other first or at all. Because as broken and as easily usable as Prime's retcon punch is, if Sentry or the Void can in fact resist it, I honestly don't think Prime can win. Even if he does outstat by some amount, Sentry's full body regeneration and resurrection is too good of a physical defense. And likewise, Prime-specific resistances could have an impact on which abilities Sentry or the Void have, could even affect him or be fatal to him. While he definitely can't stop Sentry from manipulating his own molecules or those around him, Prime has resisted incredible matter manipulation from the Darkest Night, and even straight up anti-matter attacks from the Anti-Monitor, so he's not going to die by getting molecularly altered or anything. He can also absorb Sentry's energy attacks, and his super senses and visions should allow him to at least detect Sentry if he goes invisible. With all that said, even if Prime's Kryptonian mental barriers could block out Sentry's telepathy, there's nothing stopping Sentry's AI from filling him in on Prime's powers after scanning him. Still, Prime can certainly work around a good few of Sentry's crazy abilities, but the Void is a bit more complicated than that. The Void has some powers like the mental and spiritual targeting that Prime hasn't really had to face before and could theoretically win quite easily. But a lot of this comes down to whether or not we attribute the resistances of Superman and other Kryptonians to Prime, as they have resisted those kinds of assaults to high degrees. This is the thing I'm most unsure about, but I'm inclined to say yes, Prime should naturally have this. The biggest argument against this is that Prime is not weak to kryptonite or magic, so why would his other weaknesses or resistances line up with other Kryptonians? But Prime's not weak to those things for separate canonical reasons that tie back to Earth Prime. He's not weak to alternate universe kryptonite. Magic doesn't exist in his universe. And considering he's effectively a pre-crisis Superman that just has all of his other powers or traits unequivocally, I don't see why this other stuff wouldn't be there. It may not be a complete immunity, especially considering his lack of experience, but it could certainly prevent an insta-win. It could also be argued that his soul specifically survived his reality-shattering sacrifice at the end of Death Metal, but that's even more interpretational if you ask me. I should point out too that if the Void's powers are the best chance of defeating Prime, that also comes with losing Sentry's consciousness and intelligence, but that would be negligible if Death Battle considers merged Sentry manifesting to be a likely possibility. Now, Sentry is physically resistant to essentially everything and has some mental barriers too, but the big question is whether or not he withstands getting retconned. There's a Dark Avengers story that a lot of people like to point to, where Morgan Le Fay came from the future and blew up Sentry only for him to return not too long after. Some people seem to think this means that he can survive temporal existence erasure, but it's not like Morgan went back to the future and Sentry was there. He just physically reformed himself in his own time. In addition, the existence erasure that Morgan speaks of is implied to be done by physically killing people in the past and having that affect the future, which again, all she did was fail to kill Sentry in the present, unless there's way more to the story that I'm missing. Even still, there are some notions of Sentry's existence being some kind of universal constant where reality reshapes itself in order for him to exist. This could sound like a high level of defense, but that's the thing. The retcon punch doesn't just affect the individual, reality is affected in accordance to follow suit, because it's not an inappropriately named attack. It's meant to be as if the narrative comic book retcons that writers can seemingly do whenever they want could just be done by a character in universe. And if what we're really trying to argue is that Sentry and or the Void have been or would be unaffected by any or all arbitrary changes in the medium, I may be wrong, but I've seen no proof of something that thorough. I'll be honest guys, I went back and forth on this one a lot, because it's not necessarily as simple as one guy throws one punch and it's game over. Most of the time, both Sentry and Superboy-Prime are kind of just written to allow whatever the writers want to happen more easily, and I think there are many ways that you could lean towards a Sentry victory depending on how you interpret some of their powers. If these guys are in fact even in stats, and they can kill the other just as easily and effectively as each other, I think Sentry's got more going for him, like versatility, his AI, and way better intellect. And if the retcon punch doesn't work, Sentry kind of just has to win. That makes it easy for me to think that one little wrinkle in this entire line of logic could yield that result. I wouldn't be surprised. But despite Sentry's absurd survivability, in this specific matchup, I think it's probably easier for Prime to kill him. I think there are better arguments for Prime better resisting the dangerous stuff than Sentry, and at the very least, his punch should be easier to execute, especially if he does edge out slightly in stats. I know it sounds like I'm putting a ton of emphasis on one very specific move, but really it's not a specific move. It's just a punch that happens to be that strong, and he can use a good few times in a row at least if absolutely necessary. I could see it being interpreted differently, but I do currently believe it to be the most solid and straightforward way to remove either of these characters from this apocalypse of a battle. Plus, if I don't go with Superboy-Prime, he'll probably jump out of my comics and kill me, so really I'm just saving my ass. But that's all I got for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Like I said, I am quite excited for this battle, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. Are you excited? Who do you think is going to win? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff from me. And of course, huge thanks to the channel members. All of you are absolutely amazing. But yeah, that's it for me. Happy Pride Month, and I will see all of you guys in the next video. Peace out.